Christopher Bell did not walk away from that Kansas race looking like a man who had just survived a tough weekend. He walked away looking like a man who had just watched something important slip through his hands and was still trying to process exactly how it happened. The helmet came off slowly. The eyes went somewhere far away from that infield for a moment. And the people around him, the crew, the team, the JGR personnel who had been grinding through that race weekend, they gave him space. Because you give a driver space when the look on his face tells you that words are not going to help right now. That moment, that specific moment in the Kansas infield, that is where this story begins. Because Christopher Bell coming out of Kansas stunned is not a small thing. This is not a driver who rattles easily. He is quiet by nature, measured, internal, the kind of competitor who processes setbacks privately and shows up the next weekend focused and ready. He does not wear his frustration on the outside the way some drivers do. He keeps it contained, controlled, which is exactly why the look on his face after Kansas landed the way it did on everyone watching. Because when a driver who keeps everything contained cannot contain it, when the stun breaks through the composure, you know the situation is genuinely serious. Here is what happened at Kansas. The race unfolded in a way that put the number 20 car in a position that JGR's championship math simply could not afford. Whether it was on-track contact, a strategy call that did not produce what the team needed, or a combination of circumstances that compounded into something larger than any single moment, the result was the same. Christopher Bell came out of Kansas with his championship picture looking fundamentally different than it did when he pulled onto pit road for the first time that weekend. And fundamentally different in this context does not mean slightly worse. It means the margin that existed before Kansas is now a conversation about damage control. Think about what Kansas means on the calendar. This is not a race at the beginning of the season when there is time to absorb a bad result and rebuild. This is not a moment where the schedule ahead is long enough that one difficult weekend gets swallowed by the races that follow it. Kansas came at a point in the season where every result carries compounding weight, where the points you do not get are not just points you do not have, they are points your competitors do have. And in a championship battle, where the margins between contenders are measured in single digits, a Kansas-sized hole in your season does not just set you back. It changes the entire strategic posture of everything that comes after. Joe Gibbs Racing knows this better than anyone. This organization has been in championship battles deep enough to understand exactly what a result like Kansas costs when the calendar is sitting where it is right now. The people inside that JGR hauler were not confused about what happened. They were not looking for silver linings or comforting narratives. They were doing the math, and the math after Kansas was not comfortable. Bell has been carrying this championship campaign with a quiet determination that has been genuinely impressive to watch this season. He does not generate the headlines that some of his competitors do. He does not work the media narrative or play the personality game that drives social media conversation. He just races, every weekend, focused, committed, and fast enough that the results have kept him in the championship conversation even when the spotlight was pointing somewhere else. Kansas threatened to change all of that in one afternoon. If you have been watching Christopher Bell closely enough this season to understand what makes him different, what makes his approach to a championship run worth paying attention to, then you already know this channel is where that conversation lives. Hit that like button and subscribe, because every week we go deeper than the broadcast. This is one of those weeks. Because here is what I need you to hold on to as we go further into this story. Bell being stunned after Kansas is not just an emotional reaction to a bad day at the track. It is a signal about where this JGR championship campaign actually stands right now underneath all the professional composure and the careful public statements. And once you see what that signal is pointing toward, once you understand what was already fragile inside this operation before Kansas even happened, the stun starts to make complete sense. And there is a second story underneath all of this, one that goes beyond Bell specifically, one that lives inside the Joe Gibbs Racing organization and the question of whether they have what it takes to mount a championship recovery at this exact stage of the season. Because that question does not have a comfortable answer right now. And Kansas just made it impossible to avoid asking. Let me take you inside what a championship recovery actually requires from a team like Joe Gibbs Racing. Because recovery is the right word here, not adjustment, not recalibration, recovery. Kansas produced a result that requires Joe Gibbs Racing to do something this sport demands of organizations maybe once or twice a season. Look at where they are honestly, acknowledge the gap between where they expected to be and where they actually are, and then find a way to close the gap faster than the competition is moving away from them. That is a hard thing to do, even for a team with JGR's resources and history. Here is what the number 20 car has looked like across the stretch of the season leading into Kansas. There have been flashes of genuine speed, moments where Bell has put that car in positions that reminded you why he is in this championship conversation in the first place. Road courses where his technical precision has translated into results. Intermediate tracks where the car has shown the kind of pace that makes crew chiefs on other teams take note. The talent and the speed have never been the question with Bell or with this program. The question has been consistency, and consistency is the one thing that a championship campaign cannot survive without when the calendar gets serious. Kansas was not an isolated bad weekend that came out of nowhere. It was the moment where a pattern that had been building quietly, a pattern of results that were good enough to keep Bell in the conversation, but not dominant enough to build the kind of points cushion that a championship run needs, finally produced a consequence large enough that it could not be explained away. The stun on Bell's face in that Kansas infield was not just about one race. It was about everything that race represented in the context of a season that has been operating closer to the edge than anyone at JGR wanted to admit publicly. Think about the organizational pressure that creates inside that building. Joe Gibbs Racing is not a team that accepts operating close to the edge during a championship campaign. This is an organization built on dominance, on showing up to race weekends with cars that are faster than the competition and strategies that are sharper and execution that is cleaner. That is the JGR standard. It has been for decades. And when the results start suggesting that the standard is not being met, when Kansas happens and the math on the championship board gets uncomfortable, the internal pressure inside that organization reaches a level that changes how everything operates. It changes what gets talked about in the Monday morning debrief. It changes what the engineers are working on at midnight. It changes the conversations between Bell and his crew chief that the cameras never see. And it changes the atmosphere in that hauler in ways that are subtle but real, and that every person inside the team feels even when nobody says anything directly. Bell is experienced enough to know what that atmosphere feels like, and he is professional enough to keep performing inside it, but performing inside organizational pressure and thriving inside organizational confidence are two different things. And right now JGR needs Bell to thrive, not just perform, thrive, at a moment in the season when the competition around him is not waiting for him to find his footing. Now look at what the rest of the championship field is doing while JGR is absorbing the Kansas result. The drivers ahead of Bell in the standings are not standing still. They are racing. They are building. They are taking the points that Kansas did not produce for the number 20 car and using them to create distance that is going to be genuinely difficult to close before the playoff rounds arrive. Every week that passes without a strong result from Bell is another week where the recovery that Kansas demanded gets harder. But here is what nobody is talking about yet. The championship crisis at JGR after Kansas is not just about Christopher Bell's point situation. It is about what Kansas revealed regarding the organizational resources JGR is deploying across all of its entries right now, because Joe Gibbs Racing is not a one-car team. They are running multiple entries with multiple championship ambitions. And when one of those entries hits a Kansas-sized setback, the organizational response, where the extra attention goes, which program gets the additional engineering hours, which car becomes the focus of the problem-solving conversations, tells you everything about how the team is actually prioritizing things internally. The question sitting inside JGR right now is not whether they can fix what happened at Kansas. They can, This organization has the knowledge and the resources to identify problems and address them faster than almost anyone in the garage. The question is whether they can fix it fast enough, and whether the fix they apply to the number 20 program comes at any cost to the other programs inside that building that are also fighting for championship position. That is a tension that multicar teams navigate every season. JGR has navigated it before, but navigating it successfully requires a clarity of organizational priority that is genuinely difficult to maintain when multiple drivers all have legitimate reasons to believe they should be the focus of the team's best efforts. Here is the hot take I think Kansas is demanding right now. Christopher Bell's championship campaign did not fall apart at Kansas because of one bad race. It fell apart, or at least came dangerously close to falling apart, because of what Kansas exposed about a season that has been running on thinner margins than the standings were showing. The stun was not about the race. It was about the realization that the cushion he thought he had was not as thick as it looked. And realizing that at Kansas, at this point in the calendar, is about the worst timing possible for a driver who needs runway to recover. JGR has to answer that realization with something concrete, something that shows up in the next race weekend in a way that everyone in the garage can see, because a stunned driver needs more than a good team meeting. He needs results, and the schedule is not waiting. Pull all the way back, past Kansas, past the stun and the infield moment and the uncomfortable championship math and the organizational pressure building inside the JGR hauler. Because what you are really watching with Christopher Bell right now is something that happens to every championship contender at least once in a serious title run. The moment where the season stops feeling manageable and starts feeling like it is moving faster than you can respond to it. Every driver who has ever made a deep championship run knows that moment. It comes at a different point in the season for different teams. For some it comes early and they recover. For others it comes late and they do not. The question that Kansas just put on the table for Christopher Bell and Joe Gibbs Racing is which version of that story they are living right now. And nobody inside that organization knows the answer yet. Think about what Bell needs from this point forward to keep his championship alive in any meaningful sense. He needs strong results, not top tens, strong results. The kind that move him back toward the front of the conversation rather than defending his position at the edges of it. He needs JGR to give him a car that is genuinely capable of competing for wins at the tracks that are coming up on the schedule. And he needs the organizational focus and support that a championship recovery requires to be pointed squarely at the number 20 program, with the kind of intensity that Kansas demanded. That is a lot to need all at once, and needing a lot all at once is exactly the position that Kansas put him in. Here is what makes Bell's situation particularly difficult to watch from the outside. He is the kind of driver who does everything right in terms of preparation and professionalism and commitment to the craft. He shows up. He works. He is not a driver who gives his team reasons to question his effort or his focus or his dedication to doing the job at the highest level. The things that are within his control, he controls them. Which means that when results like Kansas happen, the honest conversation about why is not a conversation about the driver. It is a conversation about the car, the strategy, the organizational resources, and whether all of those things are aligned at the level a championship run requires. That is a harder conversation to have, because it points inward at the team in a way that external problems do not. And JGR having that conversation honestly, without flinching from what the answers might reveal, is what determines whether Bell's championship recovery is real or cosmetic. Legacy piece of this story matters too. Bell is at a stage in his career where the championship window is open but not unlimited. He has proven he can win races. He has proven he can compete at the highest level on multiple track types. What he has not yet proven is that he can sustain a championship run all the way through November when everything is on the line and the pressure is at its absolute maximum. Kansas just made that proof harder to deliver, not impossible, but harder. And harder at this point in the season has a specific meaning. It means the margin for another result like Kansas is essentially zero. It means every decision made inside that number 20 program from this weekend forward carries a weight that decisions earlier in the season did not have. It means Bell and his crew chief and his engineers and everyone inside JGR who touches that car needs to be operating at a level of precision and focus that leaves no room for the kind of circumstances that produced Kansas. That is an enormous ask. It is also the only ask that matters right now. Joe Gibbs Racing has answered enormous asks before. This organization has a history of finding something extra when the season demands it, but history does not win races. Execution does. And the execution that Kansas revealed as lacking needs to be different by the time the next green flag drops or the championship conversation around the number 20 car starts moving from difficult to impossible. Here is the uncomfortable question I want to leave you with, and I want you to think about it honestly before you answer. If Christopher Bell and Joe Gibbs Racing cannot produce a response in the next 2 or 3 race weekends that meaningfully changes the championship picture, if Kansas turns out to be the beginning of a slide rather than the low point of a recovery, at what point does this season stop being about winning a championship and start being about survival in the playoff rounds? Because those are 2 completely different missions, and a team that is fighting to survive cannot make the same decisions as a team that is fighting to win. The shift between those 2 mindsets happens quietly, but it happens, and once it does, it is very hard to reverse. Is Christopher Bell's championship run at Joe Gibbs Racing genuinely recoverable after Kansas? Or did that race reveal something about this program that a few good weekends are not going to fix? Drop your take in the comments. I read every single one, and this community has been sharper on Bell's season than anyone I have seen covering this sport. And if this is the kind of NASCAR conversation you have been looking for, honest, no sugarcoating, no easy conclusions, then you already belong here. Hit that like button, leave your take below, and subscribe so you never miss when we go this deep on the stories that actually matter. This community shows up every single week. Come be part of it.